CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to The World Today, live from CGTN in London. I'm Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories this hour. The UK allows cheaper COVID tests for some passengers in the hope of boosting the travel industry. Also today, Turkey's president expels ambassadors from 10 Western countries over their backing of a jailed activist. And we take a look at how a boom in production for Italy's famous sparkling wine is putting the environment at risk. So the UK government has relaxed its coronavirus travel rules, calling it a huge boost for the industry. Fully vaccinated travellers returning to England can now take cheaper lateral flow tests instead of the more expensive PCRs. They've also made changes to the traffic light system. That comes as Prime Minister Boris Johnson continues to resist calls to reintroduce social restrictions despite rising infection levels. Well, let's get more on this now from our correspondent who's down at London's Heathrow Airport. Naweed Jabakal is standing by. And Naweed, do tell us first of all about these changes to the UK's travel rules.
Yeah, changes to make it simpler and cheaper for travellers coming back to England. Polly, it'll only apply to fully vaccinated passengers coming back to England, and it will mean they'll need to take a lateral flow test on or before day 2 of their return. Health Secretary Sajid Javid called it, quote, a huge boost, not just for the travel industry, but also for the public as well. Let's take the industry first. The likes of Heathrow Airport, aviation sector, and the hotel and tourism sector battered by COVID-19. They've been calling for these changes to try and open up travel a lot sooner, so they'll be pretty happy about this. But also the public as well. This is the half-term holiday for schools across most of the UK, here in England and Wales as well. And so lots of families are now going to be able to go on holiday at a cheaper cost. The average cost of a PCR test was about $100 US. These tests, lateral flow ones, starts from about $25. But there's still government-approved providers that they'll have to be taken through. And so this will be good news for lots of families up and down the country as well, especially when you consider the economic impact of COVID-19 that it's had on millions of people across the country in the past couple of years.
And away from coronavirus, if we can, Naweed, the Finance Minister Rishi Sunak is announcing the UK's budget this coming week. What should we expect?
Yeah, well, the cost of trying to pay for coronavirus and the unintended, unforeseen damage it's caused to the economy is run into the hundreds of billions of pounds. So more spending on the way when Rishi Sunak outlines his autumn budget this week. He says $27.5 billion will be put towards more spending on things like healthcare, like education as well, which is set to get about a $5 billion boost. But more importantly, infections and cases here in the country are rising more immediately, if you like, and the government is facing a lot of pressure to try and bring in tougher measures to deal with that. At the moment, their plan A is to try and boost vaccine rates among people like younger people, school children, but also those whose immunity may be waning. Booster shots being rolled out across the country, more than 350,000 people receiving one on Saturday. But if the infections continue to rise, the so-called Plan B may have to be triggered, which would mean people working from home. And in a BBC interview, Andrew Marr asked Rishi Sunak if that would mean the likes of furlough comes back and if that Plan B needs to be rolled out. Have a listen.
Well, that's not on the cards because we don't envisage having to impose significant economic restrictions in the way that we had to over the last year. That we're looking at the data all the time, as you would expect us to. We're monitoring everything, but at the moment, the data does not suggest that we should be immediately moving to Plan B.
At the moment, there you hear ministers still resisting the growing pressure, saying that their Plan A is on course, that vaccination is the priority. But the British Medical Association joining that chorus of voices calling for the likes of face masks to be made compulsory, for people to be working from home in order to bring these rates down and reduce that overwhelming pressure that doctors and nurses say they're feeling on the front line. Holly.
Naweed Jabakal, thank you very much indeed. Now, Eastern Europe is grappling with its worst COVID outbreak since the pandemic began, with cases surpassing 20 million, according to a Reuters tally. Daily infections in the region are more than 80,000, roughly 20% of all new cases reported across the world, though it has just 4% of the global population. The region has the lowest vaccination rates in Europe, with less than half the population having received a single dose. California has become the first state in the United States to make it compulsory for school teachers to receive a coronavirus vaccine. The decision has led to organised walkouts in some schools, raising fears of a potential staff shortage. Edis Tiansan reports now from Los Angeles.
California is the first state to require all school teachers and staff to get fully vaccinated or undergo weekly COVID-19 testing.
We think this is the right thing to do, and we think this is a sustainable way to keeping our schools open and to address the number one anxiety that parents like myself have. I have 4 young children, and that is knowing that the schools are doing everything in their power to keep our kids safe.
Parents and teachers have organized protests across the state, some calling it an overreach by the government.
We're not strong anti-vax type people. We just don't feel there's enough long-term data to justify this mandate.
The mandate includes teachers, cafeteria workers, cleaners, and bus drivers. More than 800,000 employees in both public and private schools. The requirement had raised concerns about large-scale layoffs and potential staff shortages. But the strong backing from labor unions helped bring more people on board.
The districts that have had to close in the last few weeks in Georgia and Kentucky and so on all have one thing in common: low vaccination rates. The states that are seeing record pediatric COVID cases overwhelm their hospitals and put children's lives at risk, like Texas and Louisiana, low vaccination rates.
Left in a dilemma between losing their jobs or getting the jab, many school staff chose the latter.
I'm delighted to see that we're trying to get this health crisis under control, and we have lots of other vaccine requirements. I don't see why this one would be any different.
Here in Los Angeles, the second largest school district in the nation achieved a 99% vaccination rate among teachers, many say thanks to the statewide mandate. The rates may not be as high in some other cities, but overall California maintains some of the strictest regulations around coronavirus safety guidelines and currently maintains the lowest transmission rate in the nation. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Polls have closed in Uzbekistan's presidential election, with the incumbent Shavkat Mirziyoyev widely expected to win a second term. Mirziyoyev has vowed to continue reforms and open up the economy further to foreign trade and investment, as Julia Chapman explains.
As of 11 a.m. local time in Uzbekistan, there was already a turnout of nearly 34%, pretty high numbers, which will be pleasing to the local officials who want to see a high turnout to give this vote some legitimacy. Shavkat Mirziyoyev, the current president of Uzbekistan, is widely expected to win a second and final term that will last for 5 years. Although there are 5 candidates competing in this vote, the other 4 parties are ones that are considered to be relatively pro-government, and there isn't deemed to be any genuine opposition on the ballot paper, and that's because of the political system in Uzbekistan, which has undergone some serious reforms in the last 5 years under President Mirziyoyev. Nevertheless, he does retain a pretty firm grip on the political system, and independent candidates cannot run in presidential elections. They have to be part of a party, and those who tried to do so weren't able to find any party support. President Mirziyoyev is very popular among Uzbeks, and even if there was more opposition on the ballot paper, his popularity was expected to have held up this time around. Well, he still has to make good on some of his reforming pledges. He's made a lot of big promises over the years, coming to power on a reformist agenda after the many years of his predecessor, the authoritarian leader Islam Karimov. And the country has certainly made some progress since then in the last 5 years, with the release of many political prisoners, the opening up of the country, increasing more foreign investment into the country as well. But there's still long way to go, and some of the issues facing ordinary Uzbek voters at the moment are power shortages, inflation, and widespread unemployment. So there are certainly challenges ahead for President Mirziyoyev if he is re-elected on this occasion. But the big question will really be what happens in 5 years' time after his second term comes to an end, if it does, and then whether or not he will try to hold on to power like many other leaders in the region. But if he is trying to make good on his promise to be a reformer for Uzbekistan, then he would have to step down at that time.
Julia Chapman reporting there. Now, the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has taken steps to expel the ambassadors from 10 Western countries, including the United States, Germany and France, over their backing of the jailed activist Osman Kavala. Erdogan declared the diplomatic envoys as persona non grata. CGTN's Mikhail Bar-David is in Istanbul.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan didn't mince words in announcing the coming expulsion of 10 ambassadors, calling their joint statement earlier this week asking Turkey to release the jailed philanthropist and activist Osman Kavala an indecency.
You cannot dare to come to the Turkish Foreign Ministry and give orders here. I gave the necessary order to our foreign minister and said what must be done. These 10 ambassadors must be declared persona non grata at once. You will sort it out immediately.
Tuesday, the Western ambassadors had been summoned to the foreign ministry. They represent the United States, Germany, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, and Sweden. In their joint statement, they had said that the delays in Osman Kavala's case, quote, cast a shadow over respect for democracy, the rule of law, and transparency in the Turkish judiciary system, and they called for a just and speedy resolution to the case. Turkey's foreign ministry had labeled the ambassador's statement unacceptable. Kavala was not known as a political figure prior to the current charges against him. He was known as a businessman and philanthropist. Kavala was first jailed on charges of financing the nationwide anti-government protests that took place in 2013. He was acquitted of these charges last year, but then the ruling was overturned this year and combined with new charges, this time in relation to the 2016 coup attempt, accused of trying to overthrow the government. Kavala has denied all charges and said in light of Erdogan's recent comments, he believes it would be impossible for him to receive a fair trial. The European Court of Human Rights called for Kavala's immediate release in late 2019, claiming his arrest was based on political motives and lacking of evidence. I'm Mikhail Bar-David for CGTN in Istanbul.
Special envoys from the United States and South Korea have met in Seoul to discuss security issues relating to Pyongyang. Top of their agenda, a declaration to officially call an end to the war on the peninsula and to restart nuclear diplomacy talks. CGTN's Jack Barton has been monitoring the meeting.
Talks wrapped up around 10 a.m. this morning between the two nuclear envoys, Song Kim for the United States and No Ki-dok for South Korea, both giving statements after that meeting and saying there had been productive discussions, that talks would be ongoing, but the two key areas where it seems the most progress had been was on the formal end-of-war declaration. So multiple parties involved in that conflict, so theoretically it would also have to have China on board as well as the DPRK, the US and South Korea. He said they also discussed humanitarian assistance that could reach ordinary citizens of the DPRK, and they were also exploring other options to restart the long-stalled nuclear diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. However, the US envoy Sung Kim also had some tough words talking about the recent missile tests from the DPRK, describing them as in breach of multiple UN sanctions. He also said they were concerning, counterproductive and provocative, the kind of language that South Korea has been trying to avoid to sort of foster the restart of diplomacy. Nonetheless, Sung Kim saying he hoped that Pyongyang would respond positively to the US efforts to restart diplomatic talks aimed at a sort of a breakthrough that might ultimately lead to lasting peace.
Still to come on CGTN, why a boom in Italian sparkling wine is no reason to celebrate for the environment. We're back in a moment.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Climate change is happening right now. World leaders prepare for vital talks that will change the course of humanity. Action could save millions of lives. Failure could cost many more. Do they have the will to act quickly? Does the planet have the time to wait? Follow full coverage from the COP26 climate talks here on CGTN.
Welcome back. A reminder of our main headlines. The UK allows cheaper COVID tests for some passengers in the hope of boosting the travel industry. And Turkey's president expels ambassadors from 10 Western countries over their backing of a jailed activist. Now there's growing concern that a boom in Prosecco production in Italy's Veneto region is putting residents' health and the environment there at risk. Protest groups say their UNESCO-recognised landscape is under threat from countless new wineries, but regional leaders say their guidelines are among the strictest in the country. Hermione Kitson travelled there to find out more.
These are Italy's world-famous Prosecco hills in the region of Veneto, but residents say in the past 10 years, an exponential growth in the number of vineyards has rendered the area almost uninhabitable.
The woods here were cut down immediately after it was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Zone, but a UNESCO site can't forget the people who live there.
Fabio Magro says the 30-year-old woods behind his house in the town of Miane were destroyed in just 12 days.
Before, there were woods with animals, deer, squirrels, birds, a variety of nature.
Protest groups argue that the use of pesticides has increased by almost 40%, polluting the area's waterways and putting their health at risk.
There are a lot of studies that highlight the health risks of pesticides, in particular tumours, Alzheimer's and other degenerative illnesses.
The people who do the pesticide treatments come dressed as if they're astronauts. Not one bit of skin is exposed, while I remain next to the treated vineyard with my children just 5 meters away.
Authorities are being accused of turning a blind eye to their concerns.
The world of Prosecco is creating huge economic benefits, and this is the only aspect, unfortunately, that the institutions are interested in.
The boom in this province came after its wines were given the label of the highest possible quality, subjecting them to a strict government-controlled production process.
The DOCG status protects where and how Prosecco Superiore is made. Leaders of the Veneto region deny claims of uncontrolled expansion and say their guidelines are some of the strictest in Italy. Gianluca Bisol's family has been in the business since 1542.
When you decide to buy a house inside the vineyard, you have also to think about the fact that you are inside the vineyard, so a lot of work. There is a balance to respect.
But many residents say the balance is tipping firmly in favour of winemakers and will continue their campaign to protect themselves and the environment. Hermione Kitson, CGTN, Veneto, Italy.
So news in brief for you now. In Colombia's most wanted drug lord has been captured by security forces after being on the run for more than a decade. Dairo Antonio Saga, who's also known by his alias Otoniel, was captured in his jungle hideout near the Panama border. The US had offered a $5 million reward for his capture. The Spanish island of La Palma has been rocked by nearly 80 earthquakes in the last 24 hours. The National Geographic Institute says a 5-magnitude quake was recorded on Saturday, the strongest since the volcanic eruption began more than a month ago. David Beckham is set to be the face of the Qatar World Cup next month. The former England captain signed a 10-year deal with Qatar, netting more than $200 million to become its ambassador. Beckham said he believed the next year's World Cup, which will be held in the Arab world for the first time, can affect positive change in the Gulf country. And China's Evergrande says it's resumed work on more than 10 projects in 6 cities. The debt-ridden real estate giant appeared to avert default with a last-minute bond coupon payment on Friday. Evergrande says its efforts to guarantee construction would shore up market confidence. Now, 50 years ago, so-called ping-pong diplomacy broke the ice between China and the United States. Well, half a century later, tables were laid out at the George Braithwaite table tennis court in New York to commemorate one man who played a major part in that historic event. Julia Sun has the story.
Everyone's here for George, a.k.a. the Chief. With the official dedication of the George Braithwaite table tennis court, new outdoor tables are ready for use on New York's Roosevelt Island. Gathered here are the Hall of Fame athletes' friends and fans.
I'm here to celebrate the life of George Braithwaite. He's no longer with us, but we want to keep him alive in our memories. Well, I met George back in 1980 when I first started playing. I was a college student.
Legends of table tennis, George Hugh Braithwaite.
Braithwaite was a track star in his home country, Guyana, before coming to the U.S. While working at the United Nations, he discovered a table tennis racket under a pile of documents and started playing. He didn't stop for decades.
He played before President Nixon at that so-called time when you had the ping-pong diplomacy in 1971 that helped lead to the end of the isolation of China. And in fact, some say it changed the course of history. And George was a part of that.
A part of that first American delegation to set foot in the country's capital since 1949. The people-to-people essence of the matches gave rise to the sports slogan, "Friendship first, competition second," and paved a new diplomatic path and shift in relations between Washington and Beijing.
George used to always say that sports bring nations together. So I see that the table tennis is growing now so phenomenally. It's big almost in every country now. People who don't play don't really realize that. So I just see us getting bigger and better.
Managing to make the spectators cheer with chants. Some say if the Chiefs' main games were played in social media's innovation, he'd probably garner many likes from fans he'd strike in wondrous trance.
Trends like more friendly competitions, what the International Table Tennis Federation calls peace on the table. The organization says that the concept of ping-pong diplomacy will be promoted in its championship in 2022, encouraging more people from different cultures to come together. Julia Sun, New York.
Now, how would you like to get your hands on one of Nelson Mandela's personal belongings? Well, that will become a reality for winning bidders during an auction to raise funds for a memorial park to be built near the resting place of the late South African leader. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
Former South African President Nelson Mandela's African-inspired shirts changed boardroom attire and brought a unique flair to formal occasions. Anyone in the world can now own one of these signature Madiba shirts belonging to the late freedom fighter.
We're standing in the presence of 10 shirts that have come to us directly from his family as part of an auction we're doing of these shirts and nearly 100 other things.
To have something worn by one of the most influential and inspirational leaders of the latter 20th century is wonderful for us. We always want to educate and inspire diverse audiences, especially our students, and this gives us a way to do that in a manner we hadn't thought of.
Among the selection is a black shirt said to have been worn by Mandela when he met with Britain's Queen Elizabeth II. Creator of the Madiba shirt, Swanwabili Indamase, was part of his entourage.
He wore other shirts when it was the function in the evening, but for the lunch he was wearing that when he was meeting the Queen. So I guess then what was happening is that it was his kind of a formality to say to the Queen, this is how formal I could go without me having to wear the suit.
Mandela's glasses, briefcases and a letter from jail are other items on sale.
This 4-page letter Mr. Mandela wrote in 1976 while imprisoned on Robben Island. You can see how patiently he wrote this out, and then here it is, the stamp from Robben Island prison. The letter was written to the commanding officer of Robben Island prison.
Money raised from the auction will fund a memorial park at Mandela's Eastern Cape burial site.
When people come and visit, they have to actually deal with their own issues that they have, not just in terms of racism, but also personal issues. When they finish walking the garden, they should actually have a sense of what lesson can I take from Nelson Mandela's life that I take home with me.
Mandela was the rock behind South Africa's struggle against an unjust and racist apartheid system. In line with the great leader's vision, it's hoped that the Memorial Park will create jobs, spur tourism and uplift the livelihoods of people in the Eastern Cape, which has been severely affected by the marathon COVID-19 lockdown. Julie Shire, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, a casino in the heart of the Las Vegas Strip is perhaps the last place you'd imagine masterpieces by Pablo Picasso to be on display. But 11 pieces that had been on show for years in the Bellagio Hotel's Picasso restaurant have now been sold at auction in Sotheby's for more than $100 million. Let's bring you up to date then with the latest news headlines here on CGTN. And the UK is allowing cheaper tests for some passengers in the hope of boosting the travel industry. And Turkey's president expels ambassadors from 10 Western countries over their backing of a jailed activist. And that's just about it from us at The World Today. Thanks very much for watching. We are, of course, on smart TV apps like Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK 24 hours a day on Freeview. We'll have more news for you at the top of the hour. Coming up next, it's Razor. For now, from all the team here in London and myself, Polly Middlehurst, goodbye.